Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm Guillaume Cabane, the VP of Growth at Segment. I've been doing B2B lead gen for the past 14 years now, having worked at Apple at the beginning and then in my own startup in IT security, multiple places. And I joined Segment 6 months ago, where I become the VP of Growth from Paris, France, which is why I have a strong accent. So if you don't understand, please raise your hand and shout saying I don't understand, you have a horrible accent. And I'll try to make it better. So today I'm going to talk about personalization at scale. But very quickly first, what is Segment? So we are an API company. We are a data bus. And we actually help you bus the data from your website, your cloud sources, to the tools that you need, such as Google Analytics, your email platform, or your warehouse, right? So in a sense, we're like a marketplace. Before I start, I was last week at a conference, and I was hearing one of the speakers, Dr. Michael Wu, talk about predictive analytics. And he was saying how we already live in a world of predictive analytics, like weather forecasting, is it going to rain? Or the GPS, taking into account the current data and telling you, you should turn right at the next right? And of course, the future of that is autonomous driving. It's instead of telling you, you should turn right, it takes a decision for you. It turns right. So I was reflecting on that, and I thought that, well, marketing actually might take the same path. And instead of telling you who is going to churn, who is going to upgrade, is going to make the right action, right, to ensure that that person indeed churns if it needs to, or indeed upgrades or retains them, right? So we're going to go into such a world. I'm pretty sure about that. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to cover data collection, data enrichment, and actioning. And I thank Claire a lot for looking at the qualitative side earlier. I'm going to talk about more like the quantitative. So you have to be really agnostic about your data collection. And there's multiple places where you can take your data from. Of course, and I'm going to go quickly on that, you can take it from your own properties, right, from your mobile app, your website, your server, and push that to your tools, right? But then you can add cloud sources. And cloud sources is interesting. It's your email tool, it's your CRM, it's your Zendesk, right? An example of how that is useful is if you look at this here, you can see that we're pushing data from our email platform, Customer.io, into Kissmetrics, which is an analytics platform. And what can you learn with that? Well, you can actually have control groups. And control groups are very interesting because it enables you to exclude some people from your campaign. And in this case here, we are actually excluding 50% of our users, and that's the actual segment data, from receiving the welcome email completely. And that's not an analysis you can do in your email tool because those users are not part of the campaign, of course, right? So only by sending the data into a third-party platform can you say, hey, actually sending an email versus not sending one doubles the activation rate from 10% to 22%. And that's super powerful. Okay, so let's look at the machine and how does the machine work. The secret recipe. It does data collection, it does enrichment, it scores the user and goes into action. But before, to get your attention up a notch, what are the results of this machine? Well, let's look. On the self-serve side, we have increased sign-up rate by 30% and activation by 50%. On the enterprise side, we added 20% qualified leads. Not bad, right? Really not bad. Why does it work? Well, it works because we are trying, or we're achieving, to some extent, into giving a tailored or personalized experience automatically. But what's the difference between tailored and generic, right? Generic means that you, as a user, you have to understand the product message. You have to do the effort to decide whether it's not the right product for you. And tailored means that we, as a company, already know who you are, what you want, what your problem is, and we are telling you why our product is the best for that. So I'm sure you agree that tailored is better than generic. But the question is why? Why is that better? If you look at this chart, this is the distribution of the male shoe size in the US. It's a standard Gaussian distribution. And as you can see, it peaks at 11 with about 20% of the population, right? So Generic would mean that if I have an e-commerce website, I would optimize for all the people who have size 11 shoes, right? And all the other people would have to like understand if I have the right size of shoe or not, right? And of course, that's a very stupid and simple example, but it represents very well how we marketers often forget to use these signals, those identity informations, to optimize for the experience. And we fail completely, right? We give a very poor experience. And we hope our users are going to find that, hey, there's something for them there. But there's worse than actually not having the data. It's failing at using or having bad data. And this is one of the many examples I have of a simple message. It's like 2 lines of text. And there's 4 mistakes in 2 lines of text, right? Which is like horrible, right? It's like the location is bad, the company is not worded correctly, the industry is wrong, and of course, that is a total failure. So we can't accept that. So as marketers, we know that problem, and we tried to solve that problem by asking our users a lot of questions. So like the call is a bit off, but this is a very long sign-up form, right? And so we hope that the users are going to say, yeah, sure. Now I'm going to give like my blood type, my golf handicap, so you can like personalize your message, right? And of course, we don't. It does not work that way, right? And that here is a very, very bad experience, right? It's a very bad way to start interacting with your user just to optimize a message. So we solved that problem. Let me show you how. We plugged into what we call the enrichment cloud. In this case, we are plugging into Clearbit, which is an awesome API where you can send pieces of the user information, such as the email, and in return, you're going to get a full profile. But there's one problem with that. There's a strong problem. It's that there's always false positives. Around 5 to 10%, maybe more if you have a bad provider. False positives says that sometime when I send my email, my personal email, it says like a provider is going to tell me, hey, you're actually a doctor in the south of France, which I wish I was, but I'm not. And of course, if you base your email on that, it's going to come off as we saw earlier. The only person who can correct that data is your user. And that's how we do it. Check it out. So this is a multi-step sign-up form. I enter my email, my old email address here. And what happens is that it pre-fills the sign-up form with most of my information, except the password, of course. And on the right is the JSON object that I'm getting from Clearbit in return. What we're doing here is that we are sending the email to Clearbit, and we are capturing the JSON object back and using it in the browser, in the client, to pre-fill the form. So we reduce the friction, number one. Number two, if the user, the person behind the screen, changes any field, it means that the data is off. So we discard the whole data set. We cannot like take any chances. But that way, and of course we store the data that person has changed, but we don't capture the other fields. The third thing, as you see, is that we are pushing a reinforcement message. And here in this case, I am detected as a marketing role, which is correct. So we are doing a social proof by pushing a nice headshot of Farid, the growth marketer at Instacart, saying why Segment is great for marketers. Right? So we have dynamic content. So what did we do to get those plus 30% in signups? We split the forms, which is Cialdini's principle of commitment. We do pre-filling, we do user validation, and we have in-page dynamic content. So that's great, plus 30%. But I've experienced in my life many times where companies have not the problem of requiring more users, but they want more of the right kind of users. And they have lots of noise. The data is very noisy, and only like 10-15% of the people who sign up are actually valuable. So what do you do about those hidden gems? I always ask my salespeople the following question. I encourage you to do the same. If you had unlimited time and perfect data, how would you onboard the high potential leads? And I got great answers. But the question is, how do you know who's high potential? And how fast can you know it? Well, we use another API company, which is called MadKudu, and they provide us with a predictive scoring model. So we send the whole payload from Clearbit, all the identity data that you saw earlier, to them, and in return, they run it through this actually quite simple branching model. And we get the information of the fit very good, and we actually have also the a number from 0 to 1. So now we know how good the fit between that customer's firmographic data, which means company data, and our ideal customers. But how good is that model? I mean, is it high performant or not? Pretty good. We actually get 60% of our revenue from within only 10% of our signups, right? That's a very strong reduction in noise, right? We can actually find really good gems in there. And of course, there's always going to be some outliers who don't fit the model, and that's fine. So what should we do with that data? Can we just give it to the sales rep saying, hey, this is a high potential company, and hope for the best? Well, of course not, right? Of course we want to automate all of that. So let's look back in the previous example. Now on the right, you have a high potential lead signing up. And the experience is going to be very slightly different. Of course, we still pre-fill the data, the form. Now, what do we see here? We see that we have not pushed the social proof, but we have added an extra question. And that extra question is, would you like help getting started? Yes or no? Right? Because we know that this is a high potential, so we definitely want to speak to that person. Because what's the usual process? The usual process that I've seen is sales reps go at the next day, they check out all the signups of the previous day, they say, oh, I want to speak to that person. So they send an email saying, hey, I want to talk to you, here's my Calendly link. And honestly, the responses are not great. Right? Here, we're actually reversing the process, the problem. We are asking that person to self-identify and say, before they have a bad experience, which often happens with a product, say, I want to talk to you. Of course, after that, it's super simple to get a meeting. You just send an email with a Calendly link saying, hey, I saw that you wanted to talk to us, I'm here. Right? Booking rates are through the roof, right, with that. So that's good. Let's see how we use all of the previous data of like the rich data and the scoring data by channel. We're going to dive first into email. So this is like the top of our email chart. We have about 120 of those. And of course, with the data from Clearbit on the industry and whatnot, you can have many complex paths. Like you want to onboard VIPs differently than you want to onboard marketers, than you want to onboard engineers. All those personas that Claire talked about, you can have very fine-grained personas and onboard them differently. I'm just going to focus on the very first email, which is the welcome email. So this is our welcome email for marketers. And as you can see, there's a few interesting things. It's sent by myself, because I, as a marketer, have a good connection with other marketers. And we push personal stories and content that's relevant to the marketer. For the engineer email, we have something which is, of course, sent by an engineer, right? Because I, as a marketer, I cannot onboard an engineer. He's like, you can say, like, who is this guy? Bug off, right? So here, we're sending technical documentation from someone who's an engineer, who exists on GitHub, real people, of course, right? Super helpful. And we talked about scoring, and we saw how we use scoring in the web. How do we use it in email? Well, obviously, our goal is to get engagement from the customer. Our goal is to have the customer talk to us, right? So the way we do it is we change ever so slightly the welcome email, and we have it sent by one of the co-founders, really by one of the co-founders, of course, automatically, right? And we pull the data from Salesforce, and we know who is the sales rep assigned to this new customer. And based on that, we can merge that data into the email. And as you can see here, we say, hey, I want to take a moment to introduce you to Payman Vedati, who is going to be your growth manager, right? And we, of course, push the data based on the role. And what's interesting here is that email is sent to the customer and in copy to that sales rep. So think about it. If, as a sales rep, one of the co-founders sends an email to a high-profile customer with you in copy, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to answer, of course, right away. Should we have the sales rep do that? Is it like a valuable use of his time or her time to do that? Well, of course not. We can automate that. So, of course, the answer is automated. And as you can see here, we calculate the timestamp correctly, and we merge the original email as in the body here, and we still put in copy everyone. And we pull the data from Datanyze to get the technologies that are compatible with Segment on our marketplace. What happens here is that we're creating a conversation, or what seems to be a conversation, with two humans, right? So we have the co-founder, and then in reply to that email, we have the sales rep, still putting in copy the customer. As a customer, what you see in Gmail and everywhere else is a discussion. So we have like one person, second person, comma, second person, right? So it looks supernatural. It is supernatural. It is what would happen naturally, right? Of course, it's automated. And of course, we get 82% open rates on this. That's pretty good. One thing I want to stress here, it's real time. If your data collection, your enrichment, or your scoring is not real time, if you do that through an ETL process that takes 2 weeks, and yes, I know people for whom it takes 2 weeks, how are you going to onboard your customers differently? How are you going to impact the experience? You're not. You're just going to like have a feedback from the analytics team, which is worthless in our case. Let's go into web and mobile. So web and mobile, this is an interesting experiment. You can see here that on attic and button, if you're located in an area where there's like cold weather, there's going to be a different experience, which is like cold weather shoppers, right? Which is good, a bit generic, but good. If you go a bit deeper, right, you can see that here in app, they are able to have a finer location, and they push that data to the weather API. And in return, they know if it's currently raining where that person is. And if it's raining, they push a mobile screen saying stay dry in style. Right? On advertising, you can do the same thing. You can actually push, which most people don't know, you can push the data, the rich data from your customer into the ad. Right? You can push the role, the company name, the logo. So you can treat advertising just like you would with an email. Cool. A few advanced use cases to have fun. So what if you need more data? Sometimes people need more data because otherwise it's still too generic. And I agree with that. Look at this page. This page is a very typical showcase of your customers, right? This is very valuable. Unfortunately, there is no database on customers of companies, right? But I want that, especially when I have an agency. An agency always displays their customers. And when they sign up with us, it's interesting to know who are their customers. So what we did is that for every agency that signs up, we push the website of the agency to Mechanical Turk, right, into an iframe. And then we ask the Turker to give us the name and website of each customer. We match that with our users database. And then we send automatically an email saying, hey, Mike, your clients are using us, let's talk. How relevant is that? Pretty relevant, right? And of course, that can also be applied to B2C. There's a company selling some furniture that contacted me. They wanted to do the same thing. So what we did is that we took the delivery address, we pushed that to Google Street View, and in return, actually to Google satellite image. In return, we get the picture of the house. And then we ask the Turker to describe, is there a pool or not, right? Super easy question to answer. Highly valuable data. And that enabled them to target their email database into people who have pools and people who don't have pools, right? Way more relevant. So if you think about it, it means that we have all those channels of email, of web, of advertising, of even push, right? And with all that great data. So we need to sync all of those channels together because you can take the data from your acquisition, you can change the web page, change the email, change the retargeting. But it has to make sense in some way. So how can you do that? Well, you can plug those tools together. For example, you can take the data from your email tool, which is like email delivered, create a negative audience, right? Who has been sent 3 emails in a row and has opened none, right? A large part of your audience, right? Should you do death by email? Of course not, right? Because that's a horrible experience. What you should do is actually create that negative audience and stop sending emails at all costs and send them to AdWall for retargeting. Now you can actually change channels. You can move from email to retargeting. And if you think about it, it means that you have a progressive curve of cost, right? You can go from the lowest cost to the highest cost channel, right? Moving from one to the other, which is great. It's fantastic. It does not answer the question of like, how do you handle CAC in a multi-touch attribution situation, right? One thing you can do, however, is that since you know the scoring, you know the lifetime value, and you know the CAC right? You can actually merge both. You can say, hey, I know the P factor, which is conversion probability. I know the LTV. I know the CAC. Let's merge that together. And if you say that you have, if the probability to convert of your user is like 10%, and the lifetime value is $1,000, right? And if you agree to spend up to 20% of the LTV in acquisition, then your max spend is $20. And then it means that you can actually stop spending for a specific user when you have gone over budget, programmatically, right? The last thing I want to talk about, which is fun, is something I launched last week, which is Outbound. And that's very important because usually all of what I've talked earlier is for 3% of your population. It's only post-sign-up. It's only for people who have given us their email address, right? That's 3, 5%, 6%. What about the 97%, right? Their experience sucks, right? And that's awful. We've worked on the past 6 months in getting data from IP addresses with Clearbit, right? And we got awesome results. We got up to 87% coverage, right? So the correct domain for the people who end up signing up, and 41% total, right? Which is huge. Look at the data that we get. This is very high quality data. This is for anonymous visitors. I'm now able to know for the people who sign up on the first page, even if they don't sign up, their domain, their technology, the number of employees. What does that look like? Well, it looks like what we were sending to our scoring model, right? So of course we send that to the scoring model. And of course, once we get the domain and the company object, we send that to MadKudu, and we get the firmographic score, right? And if the score is in the top 10%, now what do we know? Now we know that we have very high valuable companies that visit us and did not sign up. We have to do outbound. We can't leave them like that. So we go back to Clearbit, and we ask Clearbit on the Prospector API, give us up to 4 people within those roles that we want of like product, data analysis, and those that are relevant for a segment, right? And let's send an email to those. In terms of performance, we get 1,000 domains per day. 500 of those are net new that we have never heard about before in any campaign, all right? 60 of those match the top score, which means we get 300 highly valuable people per day. It's like crazy, right? If you look at the raw data, we get like, you can see like the timestamps. They can go pretty fast. That's just an extraction of the timestamps. Goes really, really fast. And the people, of course. We get all of those highly valuable people, the chief product officer, the data analyst, right? So what we do is that we have a very complex and great template where we take the top customers that we have per industry and we name them. So for banks, we're going to name Land Invest and Lending Tree. And for construction, we're going to name Upside, right, in our email. And our email looks like this. We're going to say, hey, surprise, I was researching your company, and I think you're a good fit, right? How cool is that, right? And we name the companies. As you can see, on Outbound, we have 65% open rate. On Outbound, think about that, right? Think about how many of you actually have 65% on your inbound emails. We have another template which I love a lot, which is the creepiness factor, where I actually expose the data, and we have what I call a double fake forward, where we have a fake bot that sends to me the data saying new domain identified, and I send that to the sales rep saying, hey, Venice, it seems that there's a new interesting company that visited us. Can you reach out to them? So we expose the data, right? And she reaches out saying, hey, I think it's cool. Think it's creepy? Of course it's creepy. What are the answers that we get? Well, the answers that we get is, hi, Venice, I have definitely been looking into various ETL as a service, and my number is, let's talk, right? Check something here. Very interesting. That person that we emailed was Henry, and Henry transferred his email to 2 other people, Patrick and Joey, who in turn transferred to Andrew, who replied to us. Look at the power of that, right? Pretty good. Few closing thoughts. What's critical to success, just like autonomous driving, is great data, low noise, and if it works directly into the tools which can like impact your steering, right? If you can't impact the data, it has really no value. And a small gift for you folks, the frictionless sign-up, that's how we call it, the enrichment in the sign-up process that we created. We're going to make it open source on November 15th. And that's it. Thank you.